When I opened the safe that morning, I didn't expect to find my life unraveling in a folder. Just a folder, small, plain, labeled neatly, wedding. I remember running my fingers over the smooth, worn leather cover, thinking it was some old keepsake my husband had forgotten. I smiled to myself, imagining silly photos of a friend's wedding or some office party he had tucked away. But that smile died before it even fully formed. The moment I lifted the folder, I noticed the faint smell of dust mixed with something metallic, the faint trace of old paper that hadn't seen air in decades. My heart, usually so calm in the mornings, skipped a beat. Something about the neatness, the label, it screamed secrecy. I didn't want to open it. I didn't want to know, but curiosity, that slow, insistent thing, pressed me forward. I gingerly pulled out the first photograph. My stomach dropped, and for a second I felt like the floor had disappeared beneath me. It wasn't us. It wasn't even a couple I recognized. There they were, a man and a woman, hands entwined, laughing with eyes full of promises. He was smiling the same way my husband smiled, that same crooked, charming grin that I had loved for 15 years. But the woman, she wasn't me. She wasn't anyone I knew. And the date stamped on the back, 5 years before I had ever met him, made my world tilt. I remember dropping the photo, letting it flutter to the floor like a leaf caught in a breeze. My hands shook, not from fear, but from disbelief. I swallowed hard, tasting bile mixed with the faint sweetness of my morning coffee still warm on the counter. How could this be? My husband, the man who held my hand through sickness, who kissed my forehead every night, who whispered promises of forever, he had a life I didn't know about? I sank to the floor, the safe's cold metal pressing into my back. I didn't cry yet. I couldn't. I just stared at that photograph, memorizing every detail, the tilt of his head, the way she leaned into him, the innocence of a world where I didn't exist. And then the folder opened wider, and I saw more. Hundreds of photographs, documents, and letters, all neatly organized, a life built in secret. I remember the first scream coming from deep inside me, muffled, almost animalistic, like my soul was clawing at the walls of my chest. It wasn't loud enough to alarm the neighbors, but it was loud enough to shatter the fragile morning calm of our home. I kept digging. Every photograph, every invitation, every receipt painted a picture of a man I thought I knew, but didn't. He had married her. Legally. The ceremony had been small, intimate, perfect in its secrecy. And the letters, God, the letters! They weren't just love letters, they were confessions, small regrets, dreams, mundane details that made their lives intimate and intertwined. Details he had never shared with me, details that should have been ours. When I finally stood, the folder trembling in my hands, I realized the house was too quiet. Our life, once familiar, now felt like a stranger's memory. The smell of toast from the kitchen, the sunlight glinting off the silverware, all of it felt alien, as if I were walking in someone else's life. My husband, my partner, my confidant, was a man with shadows I had never imagined. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to leave everything as it was, to pretend ignorance and preserve the life I had built. But another part, the part that refused to be lied to, demanded answers. And I knew, deep down, that hiding from the truth would never feel like peace. It would feel like complicit betrayal, and I could never forgive myself for that. I put the folder back in the safe, closed it, and tried to breathe. The living room clock ticked loudly, each second a hammer against my chest. I thought of calling him, confronting him right then, but my voice caught in my throat. I wanted to scream, to demand, to accuse, but I also wanted to understand. Who was the man I had married, really? Who had I built a life with? The rest of the morning passed in a blur. I made coffee I didn't taste, arranged flowers that didn't brighten the room, and watched my husband move through the kitchen with the ease of someone who had no idea the ground was crumbling beneath me. And when he asked me why I looked so pale, I forced a smile, the kind of smile I hadn't needed to force in years. "I'm fine," I said, and for a moment I almost believed it. Almost. Later that day, when the children had gone to school and the house was quiet again, I returned to the safe. The folder called to me like a siren, impossible to resist, impossible to ignore. I opened it slowly, reverently, afraid that every turn of the page would burn the image of the man I thought I knew into something unrecognizable. And that's when I found the documents, marriage certificates, hotel bookings, even a few receipts from the wedding dress and catering service. Dates, signatures, stamps, all pointing to the undeniable fact that he had been married before me. Not just a fling, not just a secret girlfriend, married. Officially, legally, irrevocably. My mind reeled. I could feel the blood draining from my face, my knees weak. I gripped the folder, knuckles white, and sank to the floor again. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was administrative, legal, irrefutable. And the most painful part? The woman in the photos smiled the same way I did. She had been loved, cherished, perhaps even promised forever before I ever existed. And somehow I had convinced myself that our life was real, untouched by the shadows of the past. I didn't cry, not yet, not until later, when I realized my world, the one I had thought so solid, had been built on half-truths. I sat there for hours, turning the photographs over, memorizing the smiles, the rings, the details of a life he had lived, a life he had hidden from me. And in that silence, with the faint smell of old paper and polished wood around me, I felt a single sharp truth pierce my chest. I didn't know the man I married. Before that morning, before the folder, my life felt ordinary, comfortable, predictable, warm. I lived in a house that smelled faintly of cinnamon from my morning coffee. The wooden floors creaked in familiar spots, and the garden outside our window bloomed each spring with the quiet stubbornness of marigolds and roses. My husband, David, was the kind of man people described as steady, dependable, thoughtful, the sort who would notice if you changed your hair or wore a new perfume. We had been married 15 years. 15 years of quiet routines and whispered "I love yous" at bedtime. 2 children, Lily and Jacob, who brought a kind of chaos and joy that no folder or secret could ever take away. Our life wasn't perfect, no marriage ever is, but it had felt real. Until that morning, I would have sworn it was. David worked in finance, often long hours, but he was always home in time for dinner. He had a habit of humming under his breath while chopping vegetables or washing dishes, a small, comforting rhythm that filled the house. Evenings were our time, the 4 of us at the table, talking about school projects, office gossip, or the absurdities of the day. I could hear the way he laughed, soft, deep, the kind of laugh that made you believe he would protect you from everything bad in the world. I used to think I knew him entirely. I knew his quirks, how he folded his socks a certain way, how he tapped his pencil when he was thinking, the way he liked his coffee with just a hint of cream. I knew his dreams, the long-promised trip to Europe we would take one day, the idea of a quiet retirement in a small seaside town. I thought I understood his past because he had shared it with me. Childhood memories, awkward teenage crushes, college stories. Every part of him seemed familiar. And yet, the folder shattered all that. In the days that followed, I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Perhaps a business file mislabeled, a prank, some forgotten hobby. But every time I caught a glimpse of David, that familiar grin, the one that had once made my heart flutter, now felt like a mask. The certainty I had in our life, that invisible, unspoken trust, began to crack. The first clue came in the simplest way: a misplaced receipt on the kitchen counter, a hotel booking for a date that didn't make sense. I asked him casually about it, the kind of question meant to sound indifferent. "David, did you book a room in Chicago last year? I found this receipt." He glanced at it, his smile tight. "Oh, that. I must have forgotten. It was for a work retreat." I nodded, but my stomach twisted. Something about the way he said it, just slightly too rehearsed, too measured, set my nerves on edge. That day, I noticed other things too, small slips of memory he seemed to gloss over, a name mentioned in passing that didn't fit, a tone in his voice that felt just a little off. I tried to ignore it, telling myself I was imagining things. Maybe it was the stress of work, maybe my imagination running wild. But then there were the emails I stumbled across, carefully hidden in a folder on his laptop. Nothing explicit, just names, dates, cryptic mentions of plans and meetings. At first, I told myself they were professional, but my gut, that persistent, nagging thing, refused to let me rest. I started paying attention to small habits: how he answered the phone, the way he seemed to double-check messages before responding, even how he looked at me, not with disdain, not with anger, but with a faint hesitation I couldn't place. I felt a cold distance creeping into our home, subtle at first, like the shadow of a cloud passing over a sunny lawn. Even our children noticed. Lily asked me one evening, her brow furrowed, "Mommy, why do you look worried sometimes when Dad is around?" I forced a smile and ruffled her hair. "It's nothing, sweetie. Mommy's just thinking about work." But even as I said it, I felt the weight of my own guilt for doubting, for questioning, and for fearing the worst. It was during one of these quiet moments, while David was in the garage fixing a leaky faucet, that I first realized just how small the hints had been all along. The extra phone he never mentioned, the letters he said were lost but now found tucked in drawers, the old jewelry he occasionally took from a box without explanation. All of it formed a mosaic I hadn't wanted to see. And yet each piece felt like a whisper in my ear saying, "Look closer, you don't know him at all." I remember sitting at the kitchen table that evening, the light from the lamp soft and warm, spilling over the folder still closed beside my coffee cup. The aroma of freshly baked bread filled the air, a comforting smell that now seemed ironic, a symbol of domestic bliss that was quietly crumbling. I traced the rim of my cup with my finger, thinking, remembering, worrying. What if I opened that folder again? What if I saw more than I was ready for? Could I handle it? But part of me already knew. I had to. The doubt had taken root, growing quietly like a vine along the walls of my mind. Ignoring it would not bring peace. It would only delay the inevitable confrontation with the truth. I decided to wait for the weekend, when the house was quiet and David was out for a round of golf with his friends. I told myself it was for clarity, for calm, but I knew the truth. I needed to see everything, to hold the evidence, to understand what had been hidden from me for so long. And so I waited, each day carrying that small weight, watching him closely, listening to his words, and noticing the silences in between. The house felt simultaneously familiar and foreign.
each room a reminder of what I thought I knew and what I would soon discover. By Friday, my decision had crystallized. That weekend, I would open the folder again. I would look at the photographs, read the letters, and confront the reality of the man I had spent my life with. The anticipation was unbearable. I couldn't eat properly, couldn't focus at work, couldn't pretend. The ordinary routines of our life, school runs, grocery shopping, folding laundry, all felt absurd under the shadow of impending revelation. I was living in two worlds, one that everyone saw, calm and composed, and another where my thoughts raced, dark and tumultuous, chasing shadows of a truth I feared to face. And I knew deep down that once I opened that folder fully, there would be no going back. My life as I had known it would never be the same.
That weekend finally arrived. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears and amplifies every heartbeat. David had left early, carrying his golf bag and a cheerful smile that now seemed painfully naive to me. As the door clicked shut behind him, a hush fell over the living room. It wasn't just silence, it was anticipation, the kind that makes your chest tight and your hands tremble without warning. I sat on the couch, the folder on my lap like a loaded gun. For hours I stared at it, tracing the letters of the word wedding with my fingers, feeling the texture of the worn leather. Every instinct in me screamed to walk away, to pretend ignorance and preserve what little peace I still had. But curiosity, stubborn and insistent, would not be denied. Finally, I opened it. The photographs came first, carefully stacked, organized by date. There was no chaos, no careless scattering, just order, precision, a life meticulously documented and hidden. The first image made me catch my breath. David, in a crisp black tuxedo, holding hands with a woman in a flowing ivory dress. The ceremony was small, intimate, the kind that leaves no witnesses but the photographer and the officiant. I noticed the smallest details immediately. The ring on her finger, simple yet elegant, the floral arrangements, the lace of the dress, the slight tremor in her smile. All of it spoke of something real, something deliberate. My mind raced. How could he have kept this from me? How could a man who shared his life so openly, who loved so deeply, harbor this secret? As I turned the pages, the story became clearer. There were more photographs, them cutting the cake, exchanging vows, kissing under a delicate arch of flowers. And then the letters, handwritten, folded neatly, dated years before I had ever met him. I unfolded one, the paper brittle, the ink slightly faded. I can't wait to start our life together. I hope we grow old like this, with laughter in every corner of our home. My hands shook. That could have been my letter to him. That could have been my life. And yet, it wasn't. It belonged to her. I sat there for hours, sifting through receipts, invitations, and photographs. Each one was a piece of a puzzle I hadn't even known existed. Hotel bookings for weekends away, small gifts exchanged between them, even a receipt from a restaurant in the city where he had told me he traveled alone for work. Every detail added another layer of betrayal, another weight pressing against my chest. The first confrontation with reality came when I found a document labeled marriage certificate. My eyes traced the words, his full name, her full name, the date, 5 years before our first date. My heart hammered in my chest, a drumbeat of disbelief and fury. I closed my eyes and let the folder fall beside me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I felt like I had been living in a house built on air and someone had just pulled the floor out from under me. Then came the letters, so many letters. Some were love notes, short and sweet. Others were long, full of dreams, regrets, plans, confessions.
One letter in particular made my blood run cold. It was addressed to him from her, written in flowing script. I know sometimes it feels like we're hiding, but it's only temporary. One day the world will know us as we truly are. I realized with horror that he hadn't just married her, he had lived a parallel life, one that existed quietly behind the scenes, documented meticulously, hidden from me. Every smile he had given me, every promise, every shared secret suddenly felt tainted, like I had been laughing with a shadow. I heard the front door open then, a faint creak on the floorboards. David's voice called out, cheerful, unaware. My heart leapt into my throat. I shoved the folder under the couch cushion, forcing my hands to stillness. He appeared in the living room, wiping sweat from his brow, humming softly. "Hey, everything okay?" he asked, pausing to set down a bag of golf balls. I nodded, forcing a smile, the kind of smile that hides storms behind its curve. "Yes, just thinking." He tilted his head, that familiar inquisitive look in his eyes, and then shrugged. "Well, don't think too hard. Dinner will be ready soon." I nodded again, my stomach churning. As he went to the kitchen, I realized that this was exactly the life he wanted me to see, calm, ordinary, unknowing. And that realization made the betrayal cut even deeper. Later that afternoon, I began piecing together the timeline. Every trip, every work excuse, every small discrepancy, it all fit neatly into the hidden life I had uncovered. I started making notes, tracing dates on a calendar, connecting dots I had once ignored. With each revelation, my mind felt both sharper and heavier, the shock slowly giving way to a cold, focused determination. It wasn't just the secrecy that hurt, it was the duplicity, the fact that he had loved another woman, married another woman, and yet walked into our home every day as if nothing had happened, as if the past 5 years of lies could be erased with a smile. And then a single photograph caught my attention, not of the wedding itself, but a candid shot taken seemingly without their knowledge. She was laughing, holding a bouquet, and in the background, David, just out of focus, watching her with a look I had never seen directed at me. Not tenderness, not affection, but admiration, adoration, devotion. I realized then that this wasn't just a life he had hidden from me, it was a life he had chosen at least once, and I was the second act, the replacement, the unsuspecting audience to a performance that began long before I entered the stage. By the end of the day, I was exhausted, my body trembling with adrenaline and grief. I had read, analyzed, and absorbed every shred of evidence, yet I still didn't know how to confront him. How do you speak to a man you thought you knew when every photograph screams, "You don't know me at all"? I found myself sitting on the couch late that night, folder open on my lap, the house dark except for the faint glow of the street lamp outside. The air smelled faintly of lavender from the candle I hadn't realized I had lit. I traced the edges of the photographs, memorizing every smile, every gesture. And in that moment, I promised myself that I wouldn't run. I would face the truth, no matter how devastating. Because the truth, I realized, had a power beyond my fear, and I needed that power if I were ever going to reclaim the life I thought was mine.
The next morning, I woke before the sun, the house wrapped in a sleepy silence that made the air feel thick, almost suffocating. I hadn't slept well. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face in the photographs, her laughter frozen in glossy paper, a reminder of the life that had existed before me. My hands shook as I reached for the folder again. I had to know everything. I needed every piece of this hidden past before I could face him. I pored over more documents, airline tickets, hotel receipts, even small invoices from a florist in a boutique. The level of detail was astonishing. He hadn't simply married her. He had built a life meticulously, quietly, as if each detail were a secret devotion, invisible to the world and invisible to me. I picked up another letter, dated 6 months after the wedding. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears as I read. I miss you more than I can say. I know we can't be together in public yet, but every moment with you feels like a lifetime. I hope one day nothing will separate us. The words burned through me. We weren't just secret lovers. This was a committed, enduring life, one that had existed parallel to the life he had promised me. I felt a sudden urge to scream, to throw the folder across the room, to shatter the calm facade of our home just as my life had shattered. I heard the front door open downstairs, and my pulse leapt. David's boots clicked across the hardwood floor. He whistled softly, carrying a bag of groceries. "Morning," he said cheerfully, placing the bag on the counter. "Sleep well?" I nodded, my voice caught somewhere between calm and trembling. "Yes, I just woke up early, that's all." He smiled, unsuspecting, and went about unpacking the groceries. I watched him, my mind a whirlwind of questions and accusations I couldn't yet voice. How could he do this? How could he build a life in secret and still look at me as if we were whole? I decided then I had to confront him, but not with anger alone. I needed the truth, unvarnished and undeniable. "David," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands, "we need to talk about us." He turned, his brow furrowed, the cheerful expression fading into concern. "What's wrong?" I gestured to the folder on the couch. "I found this." His face paled slightly, just enough for my chest to tighten. He opened his mouth, but I didn't let him speak. I needed to hear everything from him. No deflection, no half-truths. I said, "You were married before me," my voice low but firm. "I found the photographs, the letters, the certificates. I know about her. I know the life you had with her." David froze. The groceries in his hand slipped slightly. He caught them instinctively, but his eyes didn't leave mine. "I can explain," he began, voice hesitant. I shook my head. "I don't want explanations yet. I want the truth, all of it, every detail you've kept from me." He sighed, running his hand through his hair, and for a long moment there was silence, the kind of silence that presses against your chest, heavy and unavoidable. Finally he spoke. "It was years ago, before you, before anything. It wasn't meant to hurt anyone. She and I were young, naive. It didn't last. I thought it was over, and I built a life here with you." "But you kept it," I asked, voice rising slightly despite my effort to stay calm. "You married her, loved her, promised her things, and yet you walked into my life pretending you were just David, the man I thought I knew. How is that not betrayal?" He swallowed hard. "I didn't think it mattered anymore. She's gone from my life, truly gone. I wanted a fresh start with you." I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Gone? She existed in secret, documented in every photograph, letter, and receipt you left behind. It mattered. It always mattered." He moved closer, his voice pleading. "I never wanted to hurt you, I swear. My life with you has been real. Everything I've done with you has been real. I love you." I stared at him, trying to reconcile the man in front of me with the man in the photographs. The charming smile, the tenderness I remembered, the life we built together. Could it truly coexist with a hidden past? My chest ached, a tight, unrelenting pain. "Do you understand what this means?" I asked softly. "I trusted you. I gave you everything, and there was a life, parallel, existing without me knowing." He nodded, shoulders sagging. "I know, and I understand if you can't forgive me. I'll do whatever it takes to make it right." I looked down at the folder again, at her smile frozen in glossy paper, and then back at him. For a moment I felt nothing, just an emptiness that seemed to stretch endlessly. And then, slowly, a decision formed. I would need answers. I would need accountability, but I also needed to understand why, not for him, but for me.
Over the next few hours, we went through the folder together. I asked questions about every photograph, every receipt, every letter. He answered as honestly as he could, the words heavy with regret, the voice trembling with fear of losing me. Each revelation tore at the fabric of our life, yet also clarified the truth I needed. When I finally closed the folder, the house was silent again. But it wasn't peaceful. The air felt heavier, loaded with the gravity of the betrayal. I didn't know if I could look at him the same way. I didn't know if I wanted to. And yet, in the midst of that chaos, a small, stubborn part of me recognized a truth. Life isn't just about betrayal. It's about how we respond to it, how we confront it, how we reclaim what has been stolen from us. I realized then that this confrontation, raw, painful, unfiltered, was just the beginning. The betrayal was clear, the deceit was undeniable, and the path forward would be one I had to walk carefully, with both courage and clarity. Because the man I thought I knew had existed in shadow, but the woman I was, the one who refused to be complicit, the one who demanded truth, was stepping fully into the light.
The next morning, the air in our home felt different. Not lighter, the betrayal lingered like a shadow clinging to the corners, but sharper, clearer. I had confronted him. I had forced the truth out into the open, and now I had to decide what to do with it. I spent the morning pacing the living room, the folder pushed aside on the couch but never out of sight. I kept returning to one photograph, him smiling at her, the sun glinting off her ring, the look in his eyes that I had never seen directed at me. That image had become my anchor, not in sorrow, but in resolve. I realized that my life, my dignity, my sense of self could not be defined by what he had hidden. It was mine to reclaim. I started by gathering information. I went through the folder again, making notes in a small notebook I kept on the coffee table. Dates, names, locations. I needed a clear picture of the timeline, the hidden life he had lived. Every receipt, every letter, every photograph was cataloged carefully, like evidence. It wasn't about punishment at first. It was about understanding. But understanding wasn't enough. I needed action. I needed to assert myself, to make sure that the life I had built, the home, the children, the love, was not erased by his past. I knew confrontation alone would not be sufficient. There had to be a plan, precise and deliberate, that would protect me, my children, and our future. I started small. I changed the passwords on our shared accounts, not out of spite, but for security. I reviewed the legal documents he had left around the house, mortgage papers, investment statements, joint accounts. Everything was in order, but I wanted to be certain. If he had built a secret life, I needed to know that our life was solid, unassailable. Next, I began to plan the conversation I would have with him that evening. It would not be about shouting or anger. It would be about setting boundaries, about claiming the life that was mine. I rehearsed phrases in my head. I need transparency. I will not accept half-truths. Our life together requires honesty from now on. Each repetition strengthened me, quieting the storm of emotions that still churned beneath my calm exterior. By afternoon, I decided to test his reactions. I brought up small details from the folder in casual conversation, nothing accusatory, just factual questions. "Did you really stay at the Pinewood Hotel for that weekend?" I asked, sipping my tea. He hesitated just slightly and then nodded. "Yes, business trip, nothing unusual." I pressed on, softer this time, almost reflective. "And the letters, you kept all of those? All the correspondence with her?" He swallowed and looked down, a faint tremor in his hands. "Yes, I didn't want to lose them. I thought, I don't know, I didn't think it mattered anymore." I nodded, absorbing his words, letting them sink in. There was regret there, yes, guilt, but also a lingering attachment to a past he thought he could erase.
That attachment was dangerous, not because of him, but because of me. I realized that the next step wasn't confrontation alone, it was reclaiming the narrative, my narrative. That evening, after the children had gone to bed, I initiated what I called the full disclosure session. I brought the folder into the living room, opened it carefully, and laid it between us on the coffee table. The soft light from the lamp cast a golden glow over the photographs, making the images of his past life almost tangible. "David," I began, my voice steady, "we need to go through this, all of it. I want you to tell me everything, every detail you've kept hidden, every decision, every promise you made to her. I need to hear it from you because I can't live with half-truths anymore." He nodded, swallowing hard, and we spent hours recounting dates, memories, events, explanations. I asked questions, gently at first, then more pointedly when inconsistencies appeared. He answered honestly, his voice breaking in places, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. I listened, recording in my mind everything he said. Some answers brought relief, others brought more pain, but each word added clarity. Once the truth was fully laid bare, I shifted focus. This wasn't about punishment, it was about establishing the life we would rebuild. I want transparency going forward, no secrets, no hiding. If we are to continue, everything has to be shared. He nodded again, tears brimming in his eyes. "I understand. I will do whatever it takes. I love you. I never wanted to hurt you." I looked at him, studying the man in front of me. He was flawed, human, and capable of deep mistakes. But I realized then that my power didn't come from holding a grudge. It came from reclaiming control, setting boundaries, and insisting on honesty. That was my action. That was my justice. In the days that followed, I took practical steps as well. I documented everything, not out of spite, but to ensure I had clarity and security. I spoke to a lawyer discreetly, understanding my rights, my protections, and my options. I reorganized our finances, ensuring that our children's future and our household were secure. Every action I took was measured, deliberate, empowering. Emotionally, I began to reclaim myself. I journaled nightly, writing letters I would never send, expressing every pang of betrayal, every flicker of doubt, every moment of anger. In the quiet of those nights, I allowed myself to feel everything, the shock, the grief, the disillusionment, without letting it consume me. It was a delicate balance, but necessary. And somewhere in the midst of all this planning, I realized something crucial. Action doesn't always mean confrontation. Sometimes action is about preparation, observation, and self-empowerment. It is about turning knowledge into power and pain into clarity. By the end of the week, I felt stronger, quieter, more focused. David noticed it too. He approached me one evening, hesitant, asking if we could sit down and talk about moving forward. I agreed, not because the past was erased, but because I had decided that our life together, if it continued, would be defined not by secrets, but by accountability and transparency. That night, we talked not just about the past, but about the rules of our future. Boundaries were set, agreements made, and promises renewed, this time under the weight of truth, not illusion. I felt a strange sense of relief, a quiet vindication that came not from revenge, but from clarity and self-possession. I realized then that the betrayal, as devastating as it was, had given me something unexpected, perspective. I could no longer pretend ignorance, but I could choose strength. I could no longer live in shadows, but I could step fully into the light of knowledge and agency. And in that quiet, decisive moment, I knew that my next steps, whatever they were, would not be reactive. They would be deliberate, grounded, and unshakably mine.
The first time our secret began to bleed into the world outside our home, I felt both dread and a strange sense of inevitability. Life has a way of refusing to stay tucked in neat corners, and the truth I had uncovered was no exception. It started innocently enough. I was helping Lily with a school project, a simple timeline of her family history, when she asked about David's past. "Mom, did Dad always live here? Did he have another family before us?" she asked, her voice casual, unburdened by judgment. My chest tightened. The innocence in her question contrasted sharply with the weight of what I knew. I chose my words carefully. "Yes, sweetie, he had a life before us, but he loves us, and that's what matters now." Lily nodded thoughtfully, and for a moment the conversation felt like it might end there. But in the hallway, Jacob overheard a snippet and naturally wanted to talk to his father. David hesitated, then told the kids a simplified version, omitting details that would be too heavy for them. But even that filtered truth was enough to seed questions, curiosity, and whispers. It wasn't long before our close friends began noticing the tension. Invitations to small gatherings were postponed, phone calls returned slowly, and casual glances carried an unspoken weight. The secret, or rather the uncovered truth, was no longer confined to the folder in my living room. It was alive, hovering around our family, changing the way everyone saw us. The first confrontation from the outside world came unexpectedly. One of David's colleagues from years ago reached out, curious about rumors that had begun to circulate online, gossip about a hidden marriage, a folder, photographs. When David came home that evening, I was waiting in the living room, folder open, a small notebook beside it. "I need you to tell me exactly what you've said," I demanded calmly, not angrily. "Who knows? What have you told them?" He sighed, running his hands over his face. "I didn't know it had spread this fast. I told a few people, but it was only to clarify. They were asking questions. I didn't mean for anyone to know the details." I shook my head. "Well, they know, and we need to handle this carefully. Our children, our family, everyone is affected. We can't pretend this didn't happen." So we faced it together, the folder between us, the photographs, letters, and documents acting as both evidence and shield. We began the process of disclosure, carefully explaining the situation to our children, close friends, and family. I did most of the talking, my voice calm, deliberate, controlled. David listened, adding details only when necessary, his demeanor apologetic, respectful. The impact was immediate. Some people were shocked, some hurt, and some angry. A few quietly withdrew, unable to reconcile the man they knew with the man who had hidden a past marriage, but many others, family members, longtime friends, were supportive, offering words of caution, advice, and solidarity. The mix of reactions was dizzying. I remember my mother sitting across from me one evening, her hands folded over a cup of tea. "You did the right thing, dear," she said softly. "Finding the truth, facing it, that's courage. Not everyone would have had the strength to do it." Her words stung, but in a good way. They reminded me that my power wasn't just in uncovering the betrayal, but in choosing how to respond. I could wallow, seek revenge, or crumble under the weight of deceit. Or I could take deliberate steps to reclaim my life with dignity and foresight. Socially, the consequences rippled outward. David's reputation among some colleagues faltered. He was viewed with a mixture of sympathy and suspicion. A few clients questioned his integrity, curious about the hidden past that had suddenly become public knowledge. It wasn't scandalous in the traditional sense. There was no criminality, but the emotional betrayal carried its own weight. At the same time, my position strengthened. People admired the calm, measured way I had confronted the situation. Friends called to offer support, neighbors expressed concern, even distant relatives reached out with messages of encouragement.
I realized that while David had hidden the truth, my response had brought clarity, leadership, and emotional strength into the light. The most dramatic confrontation came unexpectedly at a family gathering. My sister-in-law, someone I had trusted and confided in over the years, approached me quietly in the kitchen. "I saw the photos online," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "I can't believe he did this. How could he hide it from all of us?" I nodded, keeping my composure. "He didn't tell anyone. He kept it hidden for years, but now we know and we're handling it." Her eyes widened. "And you're staying?" I took a deep breath. "We're taking things step by step. The truth has been uncovered, and we'll see what comes next." That moment was crucial. It was the first time I realized that confronting the betrayal wasn't just a private affair. The world, friends, family, community would judge, question, and react. And our response, measured and intentional, would define how that truth affected our lives moving forward. I also learned something unexpected. The act of taking control of the narrative changed the social consequences from being purely painful to being instructive. People began to see David as a man who made a serious mistake, and me as a woman who refused to be silent or complicit. That perception carried weight, restoring a sense of dignity to our household that might otherwise have been lost. Even David began to understand the stakes in a new way. He realized that this wasn't just about him, about secrets, or about past mistakes. It was about accountability, reputation, and the emotional safety of our family. For the first time in years, I saw him humbled, aware of the gravity of what he had hidden and the ripple effect it had caused. Through all of this, I maintained one clear rule: honesty above all else. Every conversation, every disclosure, every interaction with others had to reflect the truth as we now knew it. Lies could no longer be used to soften the blow or obscure reality. That principle became our shield, not just for ourselves, but for the children, for our family, and for our future. By the end of the month, the initial shock had softened into cautious acceptance. Friends and family adjusted, some quietly, some with conversations that were long, emotional, and raw. The gossip that had threatened to engulf us began to settle, replaced by a mixture of respect, empathy, and curiosity. The lesson became clear to me. The public consequences of betrayal are inevitable. Secrets, once uncovered, spill into the world, but how we respond, the integrity with which we handle the aftermath, determines whether those consequences destroy us or refine us. I realized that the betrayal had exposed weaknesses in our life, yes, but it had also revealed strength I hadn't known I possessed: courage, patience, clarity, and the ability to reclaim my narrative. And in the quiet of our living room, with the folder finally closed but still present on the shelf, I felt a sense of hard-earned empowerment. The public knew. Friends, family, colleagues, they all knew. And we survived. Not unscathed, not unchanged, but aware, prepared, and unafraid of the truth. Because sometimes the consequences of betrayal are not meant to humiliate us. They are meant to teach us how to stand firmly, how to demand honesty, and how to live without fear of shadows from the past. After the storm of discovery and the ripple of public consequences, our home finally began to feel like a sanctuary again, not because the betrayal had disappeared, but because I had begun to reclaim it. The folder, once a symbol of hidden deception, now rested on a shelf in the study, a silent reminder of the past and of the power of truth. I no longer feared it. I had faced it. The first step toward healing was accepting the reality of my emotions. I allowed myself to grieve, not just for the secret life he had kept, but for the illusions of trust and simplicity I had held on to. I cried in the shower, in my car, and sometimes late at night when the house was quiet. The tears weren't weakness, they were catharsis. They washed away the disbelief, the anger, the betrayal, leaving space for clarity and calm.
David and I took deliberate steps to rebuild our marriage, understanding that it would never be the same, but that it could be stronger, grounded in honesty, not assumption. We began weekly conversations, sometimes guided, sometimes spontaneous, where no topic was off limits. We revisited the folder together, not as a weapon, but as a reference, a reminder of what had been hidden and what we could now confront openly. Trust, I learned, could not be demanded. It had to be earned anew. David understood that. He became hyper-aware of small gestures, checking in when he traveled, sharing details without prompting, being transparent even in mundane things like work emails or social plans. And I, in turn, made the conscious choice to meet his efforts with openness, to allow space for both accountability and vulnerability. The children adjusted as well. Lily and Jacob saw the seriousness of the situation and responded with a maturity that surprised me. We spoke honestly, in age-appropriate terms, about honesty, mistakes, and redemption. I emphasized that adults are flawed, that people make mistakes, but that acknowledging them and making amends is what defines true character. I could see them internalize the lesson, and it gave me hope that they would grow up understanding the importance of truth, accountability, and grace. I also focused on myself. I returned to hobbies I had abandoned, like painting and yoga, and began journaling every morning. Writing became a tool for processing emotions and clarifying thoughts. Slowly, I felt the tension in my chest ease, replaced by a quiet confidence that came from knowing I could face betrayal, confrontation, and the aftermath without losing myself. One evening, months later, I sat in the garden with a cup of tea. The roses were in bloom, their scent soft and sweet in the air. David approached, sitting beside me, and without a word handed me a small notebook. Inside were handwritten reflections, his thoughts about the past, his regrets, and his hopes for the future. I wanted you to see that I'm committed, not just in words, but in action. I want to prove every day that I deserve the trust you're giving me again. I looked at him, seeing both the man who had hurt me and the man who now worked to repair that hurt. I realized that forgiveness wasn't about erasing pain. It was about choosing to move forward without allowing it to dominate my life. I could forgive him without forgetting, and I could trust him while remaining vigilant. Healing, I discovered, was both personal and relational. It wasn't a single moment of revelation, but a series of small acts, choosing calm over anger, clarity over confusion, and action over despair. David and I began to experience a new kind of intimacy, one rooted in honesty and vulnerability rather than convenience or assumption. There were moments of doubt, of course. I would catch myself thinking of the photographs, the letters, the life that had existed without me. The ache would return briefly, a reminder that healing is rarely linear. But each time I reminded myself, the past is a reference, not a chain. It informs you, but it does not define you. I also took time to rebuild my social confidence. Friends who had withdrawn gradually returned, reassured by my calm and deliberate handling of the situation. Conversations were honest, sometimes emotional, but always grounded in reality. I realized that being open about the betrayal without sensationalizing it gave others permission to respect both my pain and my resilience. Professionally, I focused on work with renewed energy. I understood now that personal chaos need not dictate public performance. I became more organized, deliberate, and confident. The betrayal had shaken me, yes, but it had also sharpened my ability to manage stress, communicate clearly, and navigate difficult truths with composure. In our household, the air slowly regained warmth. Laughter returned, sometimes hesitant at first, but genuine. Family dinners became occasions of connection rather than routine. We talked about our dreams, our frustrations, and even our past mistakes.
The honesty that once felt like a threat now felt like a lifeline, a foundation for a renewed sense of togetherness. Months after the discovery, I revisited the folder one last time. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. The photographs, letters, and documents sat neatly on the shelf, a monument to the life that had existed, the betrayal that had been endured, and the resilience that had followed. I ran my fingers along the edge of the folder, feeling neither anger nor sadness, only calm. The past was accounted for, and the present was mine to shape. And in that moment, I understood the moral of my journey. Betrayal is a rupture, but it is also an opportunity to see clearly, to reclaim your agency, and to build a life anchored in truth rather than illusion. The man I had married was flawed, human, and capable of deception. But the woman I had become, resilient, vigilant, and empowered, was stronger than I had ever imagined. I had learned that trust, once broken, can be rebuilt, but only with transparency, effort, and courage. And I had learned that the past, no matter how hidden or painful, need not dictate the future. Because life, I realized, is not about what others do in the shadows. It's about how we step into the light, carry the truth, and move forward with grace.
It's been nearly a year since I first opened that folder, the one tucked in the safe, labeled simply Wedding. At the time, it felt like opening a Pandora's box. The photos, the letters, the certificates, all of it screaming a truth I hadn't been prepared to hear. I thought my life would crumble. I thought betrayal would define me. But sitting here now, in the soft glow of the evening light, I realize something I wish I had understood sooner. Betrayal is not the end of a story, it's a turning point. The pain, the shock, the heartbreak, they are all teachers if we are willing to listen. I look around my home and see the small evidence of healing. A photo of Lily and Jacob laughing over a board game on the shelf, the folders of documents organized and put away, the soft hum of David cooking dinner in the kitchen. Everything is the same, yet everything is different. Nothing can erase the past, but we can choose how to live with it. I want to share with you what I learned, not as advice, but as reflection, a way of seeing betrayal, secrecy, and hidden lives not only as wounds, but as opportunities for growth. First, the truth must be faced. There is no grace in pretending, no freedom in ignorance. The moment I confronted David, the moment I forced the hidden life into the open, I felt a strange liberation. The knowledge was heavy, yes, but it was mine. Once I possessed it fully, I could act deliberately, thoughtfully, and without fear. Secrets, when uncovered, gain power only if we allow them to dominate us. Second, strength is not about retribution alone. For a long time, I thought revenge would make me feel powerful, that exposing him, confronting the world, or lashing out would reclaim my life. But real power came in quiet action, in cataloging the evidence, securing our household, protecting the children, and establishing boundaries. True strength is measured in clarity, dignity, and restraint. It's in how we respond, not how loudly we react. Third, forgiveness is a choice, and so is trust. Forgiveness does not erase the betrayal. It does not excuse deception. It is instead an act of self-liberation. By choosing to forgive, not blindly but thoughtfully, I freed myself from the endless cycle of anger and bitterness. And trust, rebuilt carefully, step by step, with honesty and transparency, became the bridge to a new kind of intimacy with David. A fragile intimacy at first, yes, but one rooted in reality rather than illusion. I also learned that healing is not linear. There were nights when I would cry again, months after the discovery, when memories or images of that hidden life surfaced unexpectedly. But each time, I allowed myself to feel it fully, to acknowledge the hurt, and then to set it aside. Healing is a practice, a daily choice to reclaim your peace and agency.
And perhaps most importantly, I discovered the power of narrative. When we hold secrets, when betrayal is hidden, it thrives in darkness. But when we claim the story, when we face it with honesty and integrity, we reclaim not just the facts, but our sense of self. I became the narrator of my own life, no longer a passive observer of a story written by someone else. Sharing this story now with you, with anyone who will listen, is part of that reclamation. I know that somewhere out there, someone is struggling with a hidden betrayal, a secret life, or a deception they cannot yet name. I want you to know that it's possible to step into the light, to demand truth, and to build a life anchored in clarity rather than illusion. Would I have done things differently if I could go back? Perhaps. I might have recognized early warning signs, asked questions sooner, and listened to my instincts more carefully. But I also know that everything that has happened shaped who I am now, stronger, wiser, and more attuned to the delicate balance between love, trust, and self-respect. I have come to understand that relationships, even marriages, are not defined by perfection, but by the ability to confront imperfection honestly. Secrets will exist, mistakes will happen, and people will falter. What matters is how we respond, whether we allow betrayal to destroy us or whether we use it as a catalyst to grow, to heal, and to reclaim our lives. David and I are not perfect now. Our life is not the one I imagined before I discovered the folder. But it is real, and in that reality there is honesty, there is accountability, and there is, slowly, deliberately, love. The kind of love that survives truth, that is tempered by mistakes, and that is strengthened, not weakened, by confronting the shadows of the past. I often think about the woman in those photographs. I do not hate her. She exists in a time and place that is separate from our life, and she represents a past that shaped David but does not define our present. My anger, my hurt, is not directed at her, but at the hiddenness, the secrecy. And once that secrecy was gone, I realized that resentment could no longer control me. I tell you all this not to dwell on betrayal, but to illuminate what comes after it: agency, courage, empowerment. To anyone watching, anyone who has felt the sting of deception, the betrayal of trust, or the shock of hidden truths, you can survive this. You can confront it. You can reclaim your narrative, and you can emerge stronger than before. And finally, I ask you this. If you were in my shoes, would you have confronted the hidden life? Would you have demanded the truth no matter how painful? Or would you have walked away silently, preserving what remained of your peace at the cost of clarity? I do not ask this to judge, but to invite reflection. Life tests us in unexpected ways, and the choices we make in those moments reveal not just who we are, but who we are capable of becoming. As for me, I choose to remain in the light. I choose to face truths, to demand honesty, and to live a life grounded in reality rather than illusion. The folder remains on the shelf, a reminder of the past, yes, but also of the resilience, clarity, and courage it took to confront it. Would you have the courage to open your own wedding folder if it appeared today? Would you face the truths hidden in the corners of your life, no matter how painful, and claim the narrative for yourself? I hope that sharing my story gives you courage, perspective, and hope. And if it resonates, please share or subscribe, because none of us should face these challenges alone. Sometimes, hearing that someone else has walked the same path and survived is all the encouragement we need to step into our own light. Because in the end, life is not about the shadows of secrets. It's about the strength we discover when we finally bring them into the open, the courage to act with clarity, and the grace to rebuild ourselves on the foundation of truth.
The years have a way of softening the edges of memory. That folder, the one tucked away in our safe, labeled simply wedding, has become almost like a relic now. I no longer feel the immediate shock when I pass it on the shelf. Its presence doesn't sting or haunt me. It reminds me instead of a journey I never wanted to take, but that ultimately transformed who I am. I often think about the day I discovered it, flipping through photographs that weren't meant for me, letters filled with love and promises that had nothing to do with our life. At first, I felt anger, raw, suffocating anger, that he could hide so much from me, that he could live a secret life, that our marriage could exist alongside another life without my knowledge. But as time passed, anger gave way to clarity. I realized the truth wasn't just in the betrayal itself, it was in how I responded. I could choose bitterness, resentment, and blame, or I could choose understanding, agency, and self-possession. I chose the latter. Healing came slowly, in small, almost imperceptible ways, in the laughter of Lily and Jacob at dinner, in the quiet moments when David shared his workday without a mission, in the late evenings when I journaled my thoughts and let them breathe on the page. I learned that healing is not dramatic. It isn't a single cathartic cry or a triumphant confrontation. Healing is incremental, cumulative, and requires patience with oneself. I forgave, not to absolve him entirely, but to free myself. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, it simply allows you to move forward without being chained to it. And trust, rebuilt slowly and deliberately, allowed a new kind of intimacy to form between us, one that is honest, intentional, and grounded in shared reality rather than assumption. I also learned to confront the public consequences with dignity. Friends, family, even colleagues knew the truth. Some were shocked, some disappointed, and some supportive. But handling it openly, without drama, without pointing fingers or creating spectacle, allowed the story to settle into reality instead of gossip. That calm assertion of truth became a shield, not a weapon, and preserved both our household and our reputations. Through all of this, I realized something essential. Betrayal teaches you about yourself, about your strength, your resilience, and your capacity to demand honesty from others and from yourself. I became the narrator of my own life, no longer allowing another person's hidden choices to define my sense of reality or my sense of worth. And I want to be honest about one thing. The journey isn't over. Trust must be maintained, boundaries must be respected, and there will still be days when memories of the folder, of that secret life, return with a pang. But those moments no longer dictate my emotions. I acknowledge them, feel them, and then release them, like exhaling smoke into the wind. I often reflect on what I would tell my younger self, before the folder, before the discovery, before the heartbreak. I would say, trust your instincts, demand honesty, value yourself more than the illusion of perfection in others, and remember, the truth, no matter how painful, will always set you free. I also think about David. He has changed in ways that matter. The hidden life he led taught him lessons too, lessons about the consequences of secrecy, the weight of deception, and the work required to regain trust. Our marriage is not perfect, and it never will be, but it is real, and there is a dignity in reality that perfection can never provide. Sometimes, late at night, I look at the folder and imagine the woman in the photographs. I do not hate her. She belongs to a past, a chapter that shaped a man I married, but that does not define the present or the future. She is part of a story that brought me, unexpectedly, to a place of clarity, resilience, and self-awareness. If there's one thing I want you, anyone listening, watching, or reading this, to take from my story, it's this. The truth that hurt us the most also have the power to strengthen us. Betrayal is devastating, yes, but it can also reveal your inner fortitude, your ability to reclaim agency, and your capacity to define your life on your own terms. I ask you to reflect with me on this.
If a secret, a betrayal, or a hidden truth suddenly appeared in your life, would you confront it? Would you demand the truth, no matter how painful, and reclaim your narrative? Or would you let it remain in the shadows, shaping your life quietly without your consent? It's not an easy choice, I won't pretend it is. The path I walked was painful, full of sleepless nights, emotional tremors, and the fear of what I would discover. But it was also empowering, because when the truth is in your hands, you have two choices: be crushed by it or rise because of it. For me, rising meant taking measured action, confronting the betrayal with honesty, setting boundaries, protecting my family, and allowing space for healing. It meant forgiving without forgetting, trusting without naivete, and reclaiming my life from the shadows of deception. As I sit here reflecting on the past year, I feel a quiet strength I never knew I had. I feel gratitude for the lessons, even the painful ones, because they shaped me into a woman who can face betrayal, injustice, and heartbreak with dignity. I feel hope that my children will see these lessons in action, that they will understand the importance of truth, honesty, and self-respect. And I feel a deep, unshakable sense of agency. The folder on the shelf is no longer a symbol of hidden deceit. It is a monument to clarity, courage, and the power of confronting reality. I control the narrative now. I have reclaimed my story. So, to everyone watching, listening, or reading this story, remember, the shadows of secrets do not define you. Your response does. Your courage does. Your ability to reclaim truth, to act with integrity, and to heal with intention defines who you are. Would you have the courage to face your own hidden truths, as I faced mine? Would you demand honesty, set boundaries, and reclaim your life no matter how painful the revelation? If my story resonates, if it gives you strength, hope, or clarity, I invite you to share it, comment below, or simply reflect on the lessons within. Life is unpredictable, relationships are complex, and betrayal can appear when least expected. But there is always a way forward, always a path to healing, and always a chance to reclaim your narrative, one brave, deliberate step at a time. Because in the end, life is not about the shadows others cast. It is about the light you create when you face those shadows, demand the truth, and choose to move forward with dignity, courage, and grace.